I'm really grateful, first of all, to my team for organizing this and for everyone who would take time in a busy period to share some time with me, to share some spirit and share some community. This has been a really tough stretch, especially if you're from New Jersey. You know it's been a tough stretch. We had the most COVID cases per capita, and we saw death and pain in our state. We saw from the darkest corners of people losing their lives, family members, community members, first responders, from hospital workers to firefighters like Israel Tolentino, the first responder to pass in our state. And then we had an economic downturn that, again, was destroying people's livelihoods, and folks were losing their employment. We have had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of New Jerseyans apply for unemployment insurance, and on top of that, suffer a lot of insecurity, economic insecurity. We've had oversubscription at our food banks and other challenges. And then, if that was not enough, all of us have seen a succession of deeply gut wrenching, I would even say heartbreaking, shattering occurrences. You've all often heard me say, if America hasn't broken your heart, then you don't love her enough. And to love your nation, but to see such wretchedness with the death of Ahmaud Arbery, a black man jogging and being killed, hunted and killed. You saw the death of Breonna Taylor, someone just sleeping in their homes, and to have folks break into her home without any kind of announcement, and a gun battle break out that took her life. Then you had an incident in Central Park that just dredged up not just an awful experience in its particular nature, but a greater experience that haunted us from challenges in the past where the police were used to punish, to harm, to intimidate African Americans and African American men in particular. And then finally, we saw in the most gruesome imaginable way, 8 minutes and 46 seconds of torture and murder of George Floyd. And all of this, I think, has left us all emotionally raw and angry and discontent, and woke a lot of people up to the challenges that we see in our society of institutional and endemic bias and racism. Because each one of those things I named, as bad as this COVID virus has been in New Jersey, we saw that blacks were dying of the COVID-19 at 2 times the rate. We saw that in the economic downturn, that African Americans were losing their jobs at a far more significant rate, and were actually in jobs that are considered considered essential workers, meaning they often had to go out and work in dangerous conditions at a significantly higher rate. And so it was exposing economic fragility. It was exposing disparities in health. And then suddenly we see what so many know already, is that we live in a country with our criminal justice system that is wildly biased in application, from policing to sentencing to even who gets station house adjustments or pretrial intervention. We have a system that's deeply biased against African Americans and has led to a distraught present where African Americans fear the police, where we have a nation where there are more African Americans now under criminal supervision than all the slaves in 1850. Majority of those are drug crimes, even though we live in a country where there's no difference in usage or selling drugs between blacks and whites. And so here we have a moment of great tumult in our country. Every single state, more than a dozen countries, we have seen sustained protest now over 2 weeks of people in the streets from all backgrounds, all ethnicities, race, age, all protesting, not just the one incident, not the response to the horrible murder of George Floyd, but in response to the deeper unfinished business of a democracy who heralds these ideals: indivisibility, one nation under God, liberty and justice for all, equality under the law, all being created equal. These words seemed almost cruel or mocking to many as we look at the landscape of our nation and realize that we are a nation in search of herself. So much of my last 2 years have been running around the country, frankly, talking about the ideals of love. As one great activist said, what does love look like in public? It looks like justice. And in many ways, I think we are realizing that our circles of empathy have not been enough for us as a country to have the urgency to deal with issues. Martin Luther King spoke in his letters in the Birmingham jail in a stunning way. I actually posted on my Instagram account to try to remind people that he spoke not directly to the KKK or the White Citizens Council. He explicitly said his disappointment was more with moderate people who seem to be accepting of a negative peace, just the absence of tension, and not a just peace, the presence of justice. And spoke eloquently about how we as a nation have to be maladjusted to injustice. And I think we're really at that time right now where the frequency of the love we have for each other has not been enough. It has been tolerant of high levels of injustice. And this, yes, and I'll speak about policing, but violence is evidenced disproportionately against African Americans in so many areas. We know in America there are 3,000 jurisdictions where children have twice the blood lead levels of Flint, Michigan, where urban communities like Newark and Camden have 3 or 4 times higher asthma rates because they're breathing dirtier air and more toxins. We live in a state and a nation where the number one indicator of whether you are drinking dirty water, breathing dirty air, living near a toxic site, the number one indicator is not economic status, it's race. And this is violence. If you've had your child's brain addled by lead, that's violence. Their lungs attacked by particulate matter, it's violence. We live in a nation where access to healthcare, again, race is a powerful determinant about what experience you have with healthcare or access to healthcare. We live in a nation that already has a shameful status of the developed nation with the highest levels of maternal mortality, women dying in childbirth. But Black women die at 3 or 4 times the rate in childbirth. And it's actually, even when you control by income, Black women are more likely to die because their pain is not taken seriously, because their dignity is not always seen, and humanity doesn't arise the same concern when they are speaking of pain or hurt. We live in a country that, from our economy to our criminal justice system, to our education systems, to our environment, so many of the issues in our nation, if you look at them through race, you see we live in 2 different nations where still just by the color of your skin will greatly impact the kind of experience you have in this country. And then it comes to police, an awful, awful tradition in our nation that I've personally participated in. It's where parents teach their children, their Black boys in particular, that they need to be afraid. They need to be worried. They need to be prepared. I started getting those kind of conversations when I was 12 or 13, and growing up as an 8th grader who was already over 6 feet tall. By the time I was getting my driver's license, my parents were far more direct, far more determined that a police incident, pulling over for traffic, that I would not somehow trigger something. I would do everything I could through my behavior not to give an excuse for an officer to do something that my parents thought might be hard to recover from or even cost me my life. I remember by the time I got to college and was a 21, 22-year-old, I remember just this frustrations building up inside of me of a decade of going to malls and finding myself being followed, or going into jewelry stores and seeing people act to secure things in my presence. And incidents time and time again with police, having guns drawn on me, being told, asked if I stole the car that I'm driving. And then when the Rodney King incident happened, and we all watched a man be savagely beaten, surrounded by numerous police officers, hit again and again and again. And I thought for sure these individuals will be held accountable for using excessive force, that no reasonable person could have seen that as necessary, where they beat him, stripping him of his humanity, beating him in a way that you all know, with my views on animal issues, that you wouldn't treat an animal. And then I remember that night when the verdict came and they were found not guilty. And I just remember that all that anger from 2 decades of life, or at least a decade of consciousness to these issues, that just made me feel rage and hurt and anger and pain and just wanting to scream. I wrote that night a column for our student newspaper that Stanford just contacted me asking if they could reprint, because the painful thing about what I wrote in that column is that you could take the same column written by a 22-year-old in 1992 and print it today and change out the name of Rodney King and put in the name of George Floyd or Eric Garner, Tamir Rice. And I remember as that 22-year-old marching then, finding myself rescued from being choked by despair with this idea, me and my generation, that we could change this. Some power that you have often when you're 22 years old with a whole world ahead of you and you just know that you're going to change it. I think the most difficult thing for me in this last week or two, as I've been communicating with other young people coming up, is the hurt that we haven't changed it yet. That things that we were calling for and demanding close to 30 years ago are still the same. And we have these tools now that seem to capture it in a way we couldn't 20, 25, 30 years ago. And that's just bringing it more and more into the consciousness of our country. Names that should never be known, or only known for their beauty. I think Tamir Rice would be graduating from high school now. But yet we know him as a tragic story, and so many others. Sandra Bland, Philando Castile. I could go on with names that we know for their horrors, and the way we know African-American men from other generations, like Emmett Till and the Scottsboro Boys. And so here we are at a crossroads in our country, because I look around now and I see so many people, as I said earlier, out protesting and demanding. They are artists of activism, trying to push and pull and demand that this country not go through another cycle, another generation, another 25 years where we are still calling out the names of dead Black men, when children are still being taught by their elders to fear the police, where we still have a criminal justice system, as Michelle Alexander calls it, that is a new Jim Crow, where we still have disparities that exist in this country that can best be seen by the color of your skin, not the content of your character or the sweat and efforts you put forth. And so I last week led with Kamala Harris. She and I joined forces and then reached out to the other side of the Capitol to meet with, work with Karen Bass, the head of the Congressional Black Caucus, the head of the Judiciary Committee of the House of Representatives, Congressman Nadler. Schumer and Pelosi got involved, and we quickly got a bill done that is common sense. Chuck, who is all about building consensus, so proud that conservative members from the Democratic caucus to more progressive members all got on, because it's a bill that does generally three things that people have been asking for a long time. Number one, a ban on practices that many cities have already banned, like chokeholds, racial profiling, racial and religious profiling, that somebody can barge in this door right now, plain clothes, and not think I'm going to try to defend myself. So no knock warrants. It also said that something I learned running a police department in Newark is that you have to have data collection. You have to have transparency into practices. And that's something we should demand. That whether you're an activist, head of a nonprofit like the ACLU, or just a person sitting at home wondering what's happening in your police department, we should have national collection of use of force or and misconduct and other key information, because at the end of the day, if there's anything I've learned in public service, is that sunlight is a great disinfectant. And then number three, as I learned as a college student, police can't be immune when they do bad from prosecution. We can't have impossible standards like qualified immunity, or in the criminal side, having a standard be so high that you literally have to be able to read the mind of a police officer, the willfulness standard. And so we shifted those standards, getting rid of qualified immunity and then shifting from willfulness to recklessness. Those are the three contours of a bill we did that was narrowly tailored to address issues that could save lives. But I want to end by challenging you, because that's not enough. It's not enough. The bill is going to be hard to get through, but the bill couldn't have been written a month ago. There's no way we would have gotten all these senators to sign on a month ago. The needle has been changed the way it's been changed in every generation of this country. Suffrage laws didn't come because a bunch of men on the Senate floor got together and said, hey, fellas, let's give those women a right to vote, right? Okay, ready, break. No. Civil rights legislation in 1964 didn't get passed because Strom Thurmond, who was the longest filibuster in Senate history, didn't throw up his hands and said, I've seen the light, let's give those Negro people some rights. No, no. Civil rights, suffrage, workers' rights, the Americans with Disabilities Act, LGBTQ protections. Change, major change in every generation doesn't come from Washington, it comes to Washington by a citizenry who are demanding it. One of my colleagues read a quote by Lincoln, I should have written it down, about how he talked about the public sentiment being essential to change laws. And so the question is what's going to happen in this moment? We are on the foothills of the work that has to be done. And it's not just within policing, because the very definition of public safety has to be changed. If you say public safety, many Americans, one of the first things that pop in their mind is going to be law enforcement. But I'll never forget, as a mayor of the city of Newark, in my first weeks in office, meeting with the head of the FBI and talking about one of the biggest issues that voters were concerned with, I was concerned with, which was the rising violence in the city. And I was meeting with him to go over gang intelligence. And it was a tough picture. He gave me a lot of sobered realities. And I looked at him during it and wanted to see what kind of response he'd give me. And I said, how do we solve this? And this head of the FBI looks at me and says, we don't solve this. And what he was saying to me was that law enforcement doesn't solve these problems. They just treat symptoms of problems that we as a society have failed to say. That complicitly or explicitly, we have decided that we are not going to deal with the problems and challenges and hurt and harm and fragility of our fellow human beings. We are not going to lead with love. That instead, we're going to take hurt and harmed and sick and vulnerable and Black and brown people, and we're going to treat them with police and prisons. We are a society that is an outlier of all of humanity because we incarcerate more people than any other country. And it's not a little more. We're 5% of the globe's population, and we incarcerate 1 out of every 4 of the human beings incarcerated on the planet are here. 1 out of every 3 women. Dostoevsky said you could tell a lot about a civilization, the advancement of a civilization, by looking at their prisons. Well, in Russia, they put in political prisoners. If you're against Putin, you're going to end up in jail likely. In Turkey, they've begun to Imprisoned journalists. They actually have lots of people in prison for fake news. But here in America, we prey upon the weak and the vulnerable, the hurt, the harmed, and the black and brown, because our prisons are made up overwhelmingly of addicted people. And I've seen it in New Jersey, how I've sat with fellas who finally get into some kind of nonprofit drug treatment like the Great Integrity House, and they have stories of being arrested over and over and over and over again, costing New Jersey taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars in this cycle of recidivism until finally they get their health care that they need to treat a disease. We in this nation have a shameful story about mental illness, which is which is a healthcare. We treat mental illness with prisons and police. We have a nation that treats poverty. We've criminalized poverty. I live in a community where you see people making tough decisions. They have a traffic violation where they suddenly have a warrant out for their arrest, and they're trying to figure out, what do they do? Do they pay these hundreds of dollars, or do they pay the rent, or pay for food, or a car note that they need to get to work? We have a nation that criminalizes the sexually assaulted. We have this shameful reality of women, almost 90% that we incarcerate are survivors of sexual trauma. And we put them into these environments that compound the trauma. I hope we all visit prisons, visit jails. I've been doing it since college, but I confess to you, before I was your senator, I'd never gone into a women's prison or jail. And when I went, I was so blown away of the shame of what we do. I just sat and listened to the women and their stories. And then we treat people who are black or brown with longer sentences, less likely to get pretrial intervention, less able to pay bail, so they're sitting in prisons and jails, less likely to afford a lawyer in a nation that has a criminal justice system, as Brian Stevenson says, it treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. All of this is ridiculously expensive. Billions and billions of dollars we spend locking up human potential, and then pay the cost when people get out of prison, more hurt, more harmed, and now can't get a job, can't get a Pell Grant, can't get loan from the bank, all for doing things. The majority of people we lock up are nonviolent offenders for doing things that two of the last three presidents admitted to doing. And so this is a moment where we are going to have a test of love. What frequency will this society operate? Will, as Shakespeare says, the quality of our mercy be so strained that we cannot change what we invest in? We cannot change how we meet problems, how we empower people, how we prevent crises? Or will we raise to a society that says this is wrong, and we won't stop until we invest in the kind of things that elevate human potential? And there are solutions. I posted one on my Instagram today about a community that just said enough, and they invested in interventions by mental health care professionals that prevent the need. There's a way out, but as the great Frederick Douglass said, there will be no progress without struggle. And so how much are we willing to struggle? I end with just this. I am here today, as I said all over the country last year. I told the story that it was a white man on a couch in 1965 who, in another moral moment, saw the Edmund Pettus Bridge, John Lewis and others being beaten, called Bloody Sunday. And this guy gets up, named Arthur Lessman, and decided he would do something. He couldn't do everything, but he would do something. He went on to work with another great New Jerseyan named Lee Porter, and they designed sting operations to help black families trying to move into the northern parts of Bergen County who were being systematically turned away. One of those families ended up being mine. We were denied the house I grew up in. It wasn't until they got involved Had a white couple pose as us and buy the house, show up with my dad and another lawyer who got attacked in the real estate agent's office. But all of that was struggled by New Jerseyans. Arthur Lessman, Lee Porter, Marty Friedman. I can name some of the names of people, ordinary Americans. You won't see them in history books, but I would not be a United States senator without ordinary Americans in a time of injustice doing extraordinary things. And so now is our moment. They may not be your neighbor, they may not be your family member, but there are Americans living in fear right now. There are Americans hurting right now. There are Americans not benefiting from the richness of our ideals. There are savage injustices. There's a mom, I can probably name you names, in cities from Flint to Newark, worried about a child who's been permanently hurt because of environmental injustice. There's parents teaching their children about a criminal justice system that will never see them as equal. There are people struggling with mental health issues, knowing that they will not have access to care when they need it. Talked to someone the other day worrying about their autistic child growing big, that if they have an outburst in the wrong environment, that it could cost their lives. There are millions of stories right now, like my family's, where people are facing injustice. And the question is what will we do right now? Will we go back to doing the things we did last week, last month, last year? We cannot change this country operating at the same frequency of love in which these problems were created. And so as your senator, I'm going to continue to lead the charges. You guys have seen me do this since I got here. I've led on criminal justice reform in the United States Senate. I've led on big bills that have created more economic opportunity, like opportunity zones in the poorest areas. I've called out injustices that people don't even know about, like the way underfunding of something called sickle cell, which disorder that disproportionately affects African Americans, but was getting a paucity of the funding compared to other afflictions that affect far less people but get far more funding. But this is the truth, that we will change when we change. And I'm honored to be able to fight, to stand, to speak out at a time like this moment in history. But this has got to be a movement. And that's why the people who are on the call tonight, during a week or two that I sometimes have felt like just tuning out and finding somebody to make me laugh. I was telling my staff about Michael Che on Netflix, making me laugh in the way that some of the great comedians of the past, like Richard Pryor and others, who found a way to help us laugh at our pain. But the truth is, we've got to tune in and just ask ourselves, what can we do in the cause of our country so that this nation, this generation in this nation, can pass to our children a nation that's much better off, more fair, more equal, and more just. All right. I'd love to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Senator. Always appreciate your candor and the passion that you speak with. So we're going to ask that if anyone has questions, that you please drop your questions in the Q&A section. And while you are submitting those questions, we are going to ask you, the senator, some questions that were pre-submitted from individuals who registered in advance. So the first question is from Gurkhan from Clifton, New Jersey. What more can be done at schools to raise awareness about systemic racism? As a public school educator, I want to get your ideas on what I can do.
Well, I get emotional sometimes when I think about the teachers. I'm the only Black kid. My brother was the first Black kid ever to go to Harrington Park Elementary School, and the teachers there, what they did for my family, and I mean, the interventions they were doing every day. So teachers is that one profession where every day you are showing extraordinary love. I was afraid of speaking in front of people, and I can name the teachers like Mr. Guger and Mr. Walker, and these folks that just noticed in me potential and pushed me to like school plays and things like that. So I know already you're doing a lot, but I think we've got to, in addition, I think we've got to start talking about larger systemic problems in schools. There's all data, and I was just talking to a person about it, seeing if we can start doing something on a national level, on a federal level rather, with school discipline. There's incredible disparate outcomes for children, Black children, when you control for what the infraction was, blacks are way more likely to get out of school suspensions, which is then kids are out of school suspensions or the outcomes for them, their engagement with the police. A lot of things happen. In addition to that, I was just going deep on some data, asking Matt Clapper, my chief of staff down here in DC, um, like, is it true? Because I'm looking at this data that talks about us being a nation that has thousands of more police in many of our schools than we do healthcare professionals. Thousands of more, we call them school resource officers in many places, that we are loading up on police in our schools and not mental health care professionals, counselors, and other the things that help kids and empower children so that they don't have interactions with the police. And so the question local budgets is really important. You know, New Jersey, we've gone down more than many states and tried to deal with this crisis of a nation that still relies on school funding through property taxes. But this is still a great thing to talk about equity and opportunities for our children. So I think that the systems that we all operate in, daring to question why is this like this? You know the old saying, it's activists, they comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable, and often asking those kind of questions about the things that go on around you. And let me step out of this for a second, even though it's very related. I've gone a long journey this last 6 years as your senator on justice issues. And when I was mayor, I looked a lot at food deserts and access to quality food, and that's a big issue for low-income neighborhoods. But I just started going deep and finding out that the systems of food, you know, are hurting farmers, are hurting communities. These massive agribusinesses that are perverting the way we do farming in this country, creating these awful concentrated animal feeding operations that are poisoning low-income communities. The more I dug, the more I realized, wait a minute, I participate every day in systems of oppression, not recognizing because I'm just not educating myself on what's going on. So I just really strongly advise all of us, and I'm trying to do it more. I've been thinking this year about where my clothing comes from, and I'm privileged enough in terms of economic privilege, to really think about that kind of stuff. But I just think we are all participating in systems, especially as racism interacts in that, and it really does in the food industry, that we have to question more often. And I'm really hoping that I can do a better job at that, and that we all do. Thank you. Missy, you're on mute.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is from Ada from Arlington, Massachusetts. What can be done about voter suppression and disenfranchisement of voting, especially for Black people, given Mitch McConnell will not bring legislation to protect voting or allow vote by mail?
Yeah, so you want to deal with voting suppression, let's get rid of Mitch McConnell. And I don't mean he doesn't have to lose his race, which Kentucky has a competitive race for the first time in a long time. But I mean, we're 3 senators shy of getting Chuck Schumer to be the majority leader in the Senate, which would, I mean, just bipartisan bills. I mean, bills in the House of Representatives that come over to the Senate that are wildly bipartisan, he kills them on the Senate floor. He takes pride in calling himself the Grim Reaper. And voting rights, common sense corrections to the horrible, since the Shelby decision, the Supreme Court decision that gutted the Voting Rights Act, we are seeing awful things going on. And you don't have to imagine it. Look at the Georgia voting this week, and how in Black communities, the waits online went past midnight. And I was getting a report today that was it's just stunning. I mean, it's not even being trying to hide it. And so when you're asking me what can be done, educate yourself about these issues. And I'm learning more and more about the creative things being done from states like Arizona to New Hampshire. There are Republicans in control of state legislatures who understand they can't fight a fair fight and are trying to design laws to make it harder for minorities to vote. Or college students. I think the New Hampshire one was just college students, young kids tend to be more likely to vote for Democrats, so let's make it harder for them to vote. And so these dirty tricks are going on all over our country. and it's good to know about them. There's groups you can support, like Fair Fight, which is Stacey Abrams' group. And so, and when I say support, everybody on this call, we can all give $5, do something to get on a mailing list and be educated and do something. I always said this when I was raising money for every campaign I've ever run. If everybody who got an appeal just gave $1 and they believed in me, just gave $1, you'd be surprised about how that adds up. But I just really hope that we can get back the Senate. And so what I'm doing now, I'm up for reelection. You can't take for granted my work, my reelection. There's an old saying: there's only two ways to run: unopposed or afraid. So I'm working hard, and I also know I have responsibilities in New Jersey as the guy on the top of the ticket. Obviously, the president's on the top, but as the state person's on the top of the ticket, we got to raise a lot of money and work on turnout to help a lot of our congressional seats that we picked up in the last one. We got people that we have a seat now held by Van Drew, who's now a Republican. So we've got to make sure we do good in New Jersey. But the other thing that I'm doing is everything I can to help other Senate races. So last night I was on a Zoom fundraiser for Raphael Warnock, the pastor of King's Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Martin Luther King's church, family church, and he's got a competitive race, a chance to win in Georgia, and we were raising money for him. So I'm spending a lot of my time on that problem because I know Mitch McConnell leaves, we pass common sense gun safety laws because 90% of Americans think it's absurd and obscene that you can be on the terrorist watch list and still buy a trunk load full of weapons. We pass environmental legislation. We pass healthcare legislation. We will get things done because so much of Americans agree on common sense stuff that Mitch McConnell is blocking. So if I had to say one thing to do, please, on voting rights, it's get involved in this election because voting rights is on the ballot.
Okay, the next question is from Eileen from Mountain View, California. Give us
Mountain View, California. I spent a lot of time in college in Mountain View, California. So it's great to hear from you. Not that I didn't like all those other places. I just like brought back a blast of nostalgia. Anyway, what is she writing?
Give us specific advice about what to do to keep the momentum going as the protests slow down.
All right, Missy, if you're ever out in Mountain View, some of the best burritos. Let me know. I will tell you some places to go for some good burrito. And vegan burritos are easy to find, Missy, because I know how you only eat vegan food, right?
Don't I look like it?
So that's a great question, and I am honestly like I don't have a clear answer because I don't want them to die down. I really don't. I want folk to continue. So this weekend, all throughout New Jersey, there's a lot of protests going on. I mean, suburban towns. Please help them to continue to speak out. I think that there's one. Missy, I heard Reverend Sharpton talking about a march on Washington on the anniversary of the March on Washington. Is that right? Yeah.
I cannot confirm that, but I
Missy, you're like what? This is like Johnny Carson, and you're why am I blanking on his name? Who's Johnny Carson's sidekick? You're too young. Oh, not who. Somebody's going to put it in the comments on the side. I know. Ed McMahon. Ed McMahon. Like 4 people were like, Cory, we got to have a thing going on here. Where you? Okay. Yes. You're not doing a horrible job. You're doing an awesome job. But look, I know there's going to be a big march on Washington, especially after what Donald Trump did to the marchers in Lafayette Park. So please find a way to stay engaged. Think of a creative protest of your own. I'm not joking. What can you do? If you don't want to leave your house, because a lot of my friends have been calling me saying, I've got an immune compromised spouse, parent, child. What can I do? I said, use your creativity because the civil rights movement, there were all kind of new things people have never seen before, creative protests and ways of going forward. So don't let this energy die down is I guess what I'm saying. Find some way, look out there, who can I help? Who can I contribute to? Who can I write a note to? What can I do to keep this a time of protest going as much as possible? And energize people, because here's a little secret. something I was told today is despite all the voter difficulties in Georgia, we had a record turnout in Georgia. Democrats came out at much higher numbers than Republicans because folks are fired up. Missy, that's when you say ready to go.
Ready to go.
Missy, okay, good.
I'll be ready next time.
Okay, that's when we are fired up.
Ready to go.
All right, and so
extra with it.
yes, I'm not going to prescribe the answer to your question. I'm going to ask you the same question. What can you do to keep the energy and the momentum going? And challenge. It's amazing what I'm seeing from social media to letter writing. I'm very emotional this last few weeks because just the things people are saying to me, moving, inspiring, touching, gripping. I'm looking over on the side, and some of the things that people are writing are moving. Don't stop calling to people's empathy and their love and their conscience. Disturb people, get people maladjusted to the injustice, educate folks, use your platform to talk about systemic racism, show the data to people that might be still in a state of denial, find some way to keep this energy going.
Okay, so next question is from Alamy. Is there a policy in place to prevent police officers with bad records from jumping between police departments?
Where are they from, by the way?
It doesn't say. My apologies.
Okay, I was hoping to get like a blast in the South, Monroe, Louisiana. I was like, wow, that's where my family's from. So we wrote into this bill something specifically to stop that by making every department in America, the thousands of police departments have to report their misconduct claims into a national database, and for any officer to be accredited to serve, that their records would have to be checked in that database, and it would stop people from bouncing from one department to another. It's a great question, and we took action against that in this bill.
Awesome. So the next question is from John, and he wants to know, how do we dismantle the prison industry complex?
Is that John, my brother John Taylor? Look, that was NBC trying to call me in. MSNBC, I'm doing Joy in a little bit, so they must be trying to get me on early to see if I look pretty enough. You got to be pretty when you go on Joy. So
the last name is John, and the question is about how do we go about dismantling the
prison industrial complex. I was just being cute when I'm sorry. I knew it wasn't my brother. So my whole career has been about trying to dismantle the prison industrial complex. I have legislation on coming out against private prisons. I do not think people should be economically incentivized to take away the liberty to shackle people, to put them behind bars. It means we just got one major bill done to lower sentencing that led to the liberation of thousands of people, including New Jerseyans, from prison. We have to keep dismantling the system of mass incarceration in our country. And there are so many ways to do that. My office probably has more bills than anybody, and bills that have passed. So that's what I'm going to continue working on. We know that this is a state issue as well. There are actually, the federal government, I think, has 20 to 20% of the American prisoners. So most of this is on the state level. So whatever state you're in, John, you should be calling the question, do we need these prisons? Californians in Los Angeles, for example, banded together and stopped the building of a new prison. So there's a lot of work to do in this effort. I do not want to pass from this earth. I want our generation to be the generation that ends mass incarceration in this country. And I think that the energy around this idea of not investing so much in the old conceptions of public safety and start investing in the larger conceptions of public safety, that's another way that we're going to render prisons empty of the hurt and harm people that need healthcare and treatment, and help with economic security, not prisons, jails, and police.
Okay, the next question is from Donna from Wernersville, PA.
What kind of house? Hey, Miss, one of the top 5 vegan eating cities in America is Philly. You wouldn't think it. Philly. I'm telling you right now, I know there's some Philly people here listening. Veg, Blackbird Kitchen. I can go through the place. If you like cheesesteak, do you like cheesesteak?
A lot.
So then hopefully the campaign will take us to Camden. You and I would dart over the river and I would get you the best vegan cheesesteak sandwich you've ever tasted. I might even lie to you, Missy. I might even lie to you and tell you that it's not vegan because you wouldn't believe that it is. Okay, give me the question.
Um, so Donna from Wernersville, PA, what kind of support are these efforts getting from Republicans in Washington?
So I'm literally in trouble because I was supposed to return a Republican's call earlier today. There is some interest on the other side of the aisle. And that's why I know I want to get something done in these next 150 days. But I know if we take the Senate back, I was talking to Kamala about this, we could pick up 10 votes or 9 votes or 7 votes that we need, whatever it is, to get a major landmark policing bill done. So do not get into I try to tell them this is advice for myself. The lazy attitude of just looping all Republicans are bad or against this or whatever. There are people on the other side of the aisle who have been receptive to my conversations that give me hope that we can get something big and landmark done. I will not, though, satisfy myself with a watered down, anemic bill and again, the activists in the streets are eloquently calling for this. We don't need another study. We don't need to give more money to the police for them to figure this out. Often, they want to see substantive accountability. That's what our bill is really based on. All right, Missy, keep going. I know we're running low on time.
I'm going to combine two questions. I think they're connected and give both individuals credit. So this question is a combination from Claire and from.
Did you say the question is from Montclair?
No.
Oh.
Well, let me just ask Claire's question because I can't find the other one. So Claire, she and it doesn't say where she's from, but from Claire, she asked, as a Black man in America, what are you doing to take care of yourself emotionally and psychologically during these traumatizing times? And how are you doing just in general? And this may be the last question, depending on how long you go.
I won't go long, though. I mean, that's so moving to me, the question. And Claire, like a lot of folks from Black and Not, I mean, this has been a time of gnashing of teeth, of weeping, of just hurting. And I found fellowship with lots of friends. But that is an amazing question. I want to hug you. I want to be hugged by you because that is a hug in a question. And so I'm trying to remind myself of that because we all need to take care of ourselves. We all need to nurture ourselves and be nurtured by others. And this is going to be a long fight. So I'm very conscious of your question and I'm very grateful for it. And I just want everybody to know I feel extraordinarily blessed to be a United States Senator at this moment in history, to be able to speak to these issues, to share some of my pain and my own vulnerability on these issues, but also talk to the higher ideals of love that are necessary to solve them. And that's cathartic to be where I am and to be in this position. And it's giving me solace to be able to fight and do things like we did this week, which is introduce a historic bill with nothing like this has ever been introduced in the past. So thank you. Thank you so much for that question.
So we do have time for one more.
All right.
This is from Mara. Mara wants to know if you could have every senator read just one book right now, what would it be? A bit of an ally reading list. What would it be?
I have bought books for senators. I think the two that we bought, and I say we because I think I partner with another senator each time. The one is Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy. And this is actually one where if you have an Audible account, Newark, New Jersey company, I would listen to Just Mercy. Brian Stevenson is one of my greatest life heroes. I just invited him to speak to all the Democratic senators. It's an amazing book. Please listen to the book, or if you can't do that, grab it and read it. And then the other one is that we bought for everybody was Michelle Alexander's A New Jim Crow, which is a painful, difficult read. But even I, who thought I knew everything about these issues, she just breaks down data and study after study. It's an important book. It's a landmark book, and I would want every senator to read it. I would want everybody on this call to read those two books.
Okay, this is the last question, sir.
All right.
This is from Doris Harry. What are some ways to leave our comfort zone bubble and actually build relationships with our future friends of color?
I love that question because I question myself all the time. I'm a man of faith, but when's the last time I went to a mosque or a synagogue or a Hindu temple? The most important thing I think that you can do is not get comfortable and to leave your comfort zones and to reach out to other people. Go to restaurants out in another neighborhood or a place you haven't gone. Have a dinner party with folks that you like a lot but haven't got them together. Get yourself to get to know people that are different and to help other people do the same. Take time to learn about folk. It is not, I have been blessed, especially in my younger, more ignorant days, because we're all a little ignorant of each other, just to have incredible, patient people that when I ask stupid questions to my LGBTQ friends, to my trans friends, to my native friends, I know Missy and I can tell you about sometimes the questions we get sometimes where you have to take a breath and then explain. Missy's like, sometimes I don't explain, Cory. I just give a look. But so I've tried to push myself to read. There's so much good stuff coming out that helps us to learn, to know before we go. So I mean, there's an abundance of people. You could just look up issues on the internet, find YouTube videos. I have seen these eloquent kids, white kids, breaking down systematic racism online, where I'm just like, who is this person? Like, they were more woke than I was as a black man when they were 12, 13, in terms of their ability to explain the larger systemic racism in our country. So I would say, number one, you're right. Get out of your comfort zones. Go engage with people. You'll be blown away by how gracious people are in wanting you to teach you, to help you learn about their culture, about their faith, about their experiences. There's a whole bunch of anti-racism work that's going on now. A lot of it led by white people who are blowing my mind with how well they are talking to other white folks about how to be an anti-racist, because it's not enough to say I'm not a racist. If racism exists, you're either complicit in it or actively working against it. Same thing with sexism. Same thing with Islamophobia. We all need to be activists against all of these things. Anti-Semitism is on the rise in this country. What are we doing about it, saying about it? So your question is it's an urgent question. It's a demanding question. As I've been saying a lot about questions, the problem I get is when we stop asking the question and put the question down and get comfortable again. We should always be asking ourselves, even if we don't have an answer right now, what could I be doing? What should I be doing? And take time, schedule stuff in. Like, here's an hour, family time. We are going to pull up this video about anti-racism because we just Googled it. Here's some of the best people doing work, and we're just going to listen. Here is something that makes me feel uncomfortable when I hear it, but I'm going to put this in and hear it. I mean, God, you can go back and hear eloquent speeches by James Baldwin. Ta-Nehisi Coates has written, I mean, hell, if you hear the word reparations and it makes you feel uncomfortable, read the famous Ta-Nehisi Coates essay on reparations. There's just so many things out there that can help us to put, and even if you don't end up agreeing with the issue, you will have vast more understanding, sympathy, and empathy for those making the points. And that's how I will end, Missy. I'm going to say that this is, Missy's like, end, Cory, end. You've got Joya coming at you. Love. It is radical concept that if you don't live in if you're not part of my family, if you don't pray like me and look like me, I'm going to still love you. And love is not sentimentality; it's sacrifice. It is work. It is hard. It is the most demanding path. And in the time that people are not trying to lead with love, they're trying to lead with fear. They're trying to make you afraid of other Americans. They're trying to demonize and demean and degrade other Americans. This is the call to love, and love. What does it look like in public justice? We have to be agents of that. So I feel your love. I am thankful for everybody being involved. Missy, I love you. I thank you. And I pray for our country. I really do at this time. I have no certainty in outcomes, but I'm going to stay, as Frederick Douglass says, I'm going to pray. And I'm going to also pray with my feet and my hands by getting to work. So thank you, everybody.
Thank
I'm
you,
going to go to